Why this hidden war is deciding your spiritual future. Most people believe their spiritual future will be decided by a single dramatic moment, a major failure, a sudden awakening, or a visible turning point. But the truth is far more unsettling. Your spiritual future is being decided quietly, daily and invisibly, long before you ever notice the consequences. There is a hidden war unfolding within you, and whether you are aware of it or not, you are already participating. This war does not announce itself with noise or spectacle. It does not arrive with obvious temptation or open rebellion. Instead, it works subtly, shaping your desires, dulling your discernment, and slowly redefining what feels normal. Over time, what once disturbed your spirit begins to feel acceptable. What once felt sacred becomes negotiable, and what once required vigilance now seems harmless. This is how spiritual destinies are lost, not through sudden collapse, but through gradual surrender. The most dangerous battles are not fought in public failures, but in private compromises. They happen in your thoughts before they reach your actions. They happen in your habits before they reach your character. They happen in your spirit long before they touch your outward life. And by the time most people realize something is wrong, the war has already reshaped their inner world. This hidden war determines whether your spirit grows stronger or weaker, clearer or more confused, aligned or divided. It decides whether you walk with authority or live in constant internal resistance. It determines whether your spiritual life deepens with time or slowly erodes under the weight of distraction, comfort, and unchecked desire. Many believers feel spiritually tired without knowing why. They pray but feel distant. They try to grow but feel stuck. They seek clarity but feel fog. The problem is not lack of effort. It is lack of awareness. You cannot win a war you do not recognize, and you cannot protect a future you do not understand is under attack. This text exists to expose that hidden war, not to inspire fear, but to awaken clarity, not to condemn, but to restore strength, because once you see how this war operates, it loses much of its power. Awareness does not end the battle, but it gives you the ability to fight with wisdom instead of confusion. Your spiritual future is not being decided someday. It is being decided now, in what you tolerate, what you resist, what you feed, and what you neglect. The question is not whether the war exists. The question is whether you will remain unaware of it, or finally rise with understanding and intention. The war you were never taught to recognize. One of the greatest disadvantages facing modern believers is not temptation itself, but miseducation. Most people were never taught how spiritual warfare actually functions. They were taught to fear obvious sins, dramatic falls, and visible rebellion, but not the slow erosion that happens through subtle compromise. As a result, they stay alert for the wrong enemies, while the real war advances unnoticed. This hidden war does not primarily attack your beliefs. It targets your perception. If it can reshape how you see yourself, how you see discipline, how you see obedience, and how you see time, it no longer needs to fight you directly. It simply waits for you to weaken yourself. The war begins with distraction. Not immoral distraction at first, but neutral distraction, harmless content, endless stimulation, constant noise. The mind becomes trained to seek relief instead of depth, comfort instead of clarity, and novelty instead of truth. Over time, silence feels uncomfortable, stillness feels boring, and reflection feels unnecessary. Yet silence is where discernment is sharpened. Stillness is where conviction is heard. Reflection is where alignment is restored. By removing these quietly, the war advances without resistance. Then comes dilution. Spiritual practices are not attacked openly, they are diluted. Prayer becomes rushed, scripture becomes occasional, reflection becomes shallow, discipline becomes optional. Nothing is forbidden, everything is simply postponed. Tomorrow becomes the most dangerous word in the spiritual vocabulary. Tomorrow to pray deeper, tomorrow to fast, tomorrow to realign, tomorrow to change. Tomorrow never arrives, but the cost accumulates daily. The next phase is normalization. What once felt wrong now feels ordinary. What once triggered conviction now triggers rationalization. You begin explaining behaviors instead of confronting them. You justify patterns instead of breaking them. You compare yourself to others who are weaker rather than aligning yourself with what is higher. The war does not need to silence your conscience. It only needs to keep you busy explaining it away. This is why many people feel spiritually numb without being spiritually dead. They still believe, they still speak the language, they still identify with faith. But the sharp edge of conviction has been dulled. Sensitivity to spiritual signals has faded. The internal alarm system has been silenced through overexposure and under-discipline. Another tactic of this hidden war is exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion alone, but spiritual fatigue. When you carry unresolved inner conflict for too long, the soul becomes tired. You begin avoiding depth because it feels demanding. You prefer surface-level engagement because it feels manageable. The war does not always aim to make you sinful. Sometimes it aims to make you tired enough to stop resisting. Spiritual exhaustion often masquerades as personality. People say, "This is just how I am," when in reality, it is how they have adapted to internal conflict. They mistake desensitization for maturity. They confuse emotional numbness with peace. But peace brings clarity, not dullness. Maturity sharpens discernment, not weakens it. This war is rarely discussed because it does not fit dramatic narratives. It does not involve visible demons or external persecution. It happens internally, invisibly and gradually, yet its outcomes are devastating. Over time, spiritual authority fades, confidence in discernment weakens, inner division grows, and the person wonders why their spiritual life feels fragile despite years of belief. The most dangerous part of this war is that it convinces you nothing is wrong. As long as you are functional, productive, and socially acceptable, the erosion continues unchecked. But spiritual strength is not measured by functionality. It is measured by alignment. You can function well while drifting far from clarity, authority, and depth. This is why awakening to this hidden war is not optional. It is foundational. Until you recognize how subtly your attention, habits, and inner life are being shaped, you will keep fighting surface-level battles while losing ground at the core. The moment you recognize this war, everything changes. You stop asking only, "Is this allowed?" and begin asking, "Is this strengthening or weakening my spirit?" You stop measuring growth by activity and begin measuring it by sensitivity, discipline, and alignment. You stop reacting and begin intentionally choosing what feeds your inner life. Your spiritual future is not decided by how loudly you profess faith, but by how consistently you guard your inner world. This war is not about perfection. It is about awareness, intention, and direction, and the earlier you recognize it, the more authority you regain. If this message is helping you see what was once hidden, subscribe to the channel. These teachings are here to help you recognize the battles that shape your destiny before they silently decide it for you. How this war quietly shapes your desires before you ever choose. The most misunderstood aspect of this hidden war is where it actually begins. Most people assume spiritual battles start at the level of choice, a decision to do right or wrong, to obey or resist, to advance or retreat. But by the time a choice is visible, the war has already been active for a long time. The real battlefield is not your actions, it is your desires. And this war is incredibly effective because it reshapes what you want long before you ever realize you are choosing anything at all. Desire feels personal, it feels natural, it feels like you. That is why it is such a powerful point of influence. When something feels like your own inclination, you rarely question it. You defend it, you protect it, you rationalize it, And this is precisely why the hidden war focuses on desire rather than command. It does not need to force you to act. It only needs to gently train your inner appetite. Desires are not static, they are cultivated. What you expose yourself to repeatedly begins to feel familiar. What feels familiar begins to feel safe. What feels safe begins to feel desirable. Over time, your internal compass shifts without any dramatic event. The danger is not that you suddenly want what is destructive. The danger is that you slowly stop wanting what once made you strong. This is how people drift spiritually while sincerely believing they are still the same person. Their language has not changed, their identity labels have not changed, their beliefs may not have changed, but their inner hunger has. They no longer crave stillness, they no longer crave truth, they no longer crave depth. Instead, they crave relief, distraction, affirmation, and escape. None of these are inherently evil, but when they replace spiritual hunger, the soul begins to weaken quietly. One of the most effective tactics of this war is replacing spiritual desire with emotional desire. Emotional desire seeks comfort, validation, pleasure, and control. Spiritual desire seeks alignment, truth, surrender, and transformation. Emotional desire wants to feel better. Spiritual desire wants to become better. When emotional desire dominates, spiritual disciplines begin to feel burdensome instead of life-giving. This is why many people say they don't feel like praying, reflecting, fasting, or seeking depth. They interpret that lack of desire as authenticity. They say, "I don't want to be fake." But authenticity does not mean obeying every feeling. It means recognizing which desires are shaping you and choosing which ones deserve authority. The war thrives when feelings are given unchecked power. Another subtle strategy is urgency distortion. The war convinces you that everything external is urgent and everything internal can wait. Messages, responsibilities, entertainment, opinions, news, and noise demand immediate attention. Meanwhile, inner alignment, reflection, and spiritual maintenance are framed as flexible, optional, or postponable. The soul is always put on hold for later, and later never comes. Over time, this creates a life that is constantly active but internally neglected. The person is busy but not grounded, informed but not wise, connected but not centered. And because nothing catastrophic happens immediately, the drift feels harmless. Yet spiritual erosion rarely announces itself with collapse. It announces itself with distraction. This war also reshapes desire through comparison. When you constantly measure yourself against others who are less disciplined, less aware, or less committed, your internal standard lowers. You feel justified in mediocrity. You feel relieved rather than challenged. Comparison becomes a sedative instead of a mirror. Instead of asking, "Am I aligned with what strengthens my spirit?" you ask, "Am I better than most?" And that question slowly erodes excellence. Desire is further reshaped by reward conditioning. Modern life rewards immediacy, fast gratification, instant feedback, quick pleasure. Spiritual growth, by contrast, rewards patience, consistency, and unseen effort. When the brain is trained to expect immediate payoff, long-term spiritual investment feels unrewarding. The war exploits this gap by making discipline feel pointless and indulgence feel efficient. Another critical element is identity confusion. When you stop seeing yourself as a steward of your inner life and start seeing yourself as a passive product of circumstances, desire loses direction. You begin saying things like, "This is just how I feel," or "This is just who I am right now," instead of asking whether those feelings and patterns are shaping you towards strength or decay. The war wins when identity becomes reactive instead of intentional. The most dangerous desires are not obviously destructive ones. They are neutral ones that crowd out what matters. Comfort, entertainment, social approval, constant stimulation. These things do not feel like enemies. They feel normal. But when they dominate your inner life, they leave little room for depth. A soul constantly filled with noise has no space for clarity. This is why the war does not always push you toward darkness. Sometimes it simply keeps you busy with lightless activity. You are not falling, you are stagnating. And stagnation over time weakens discernment just as effectively as open rebellion. Another overlooked aspect is how unresolved pain shapes desire. When wounds are ignored, the soul seeks relief wherever it can find it. Pleasure becomes medicine, distraction becomes anesthesia, validation becomes oxygen. Instead of healing the wound, desire is redirected to numb it. The war does not create the pain, it simply offers substitutes for healing, and substitutes always come with a cost. As desires shift, choices begin to feel automatic. You stop experiencing internal conflict because the battle has already been decided upstream. You no longer wrestle because the desire itself has aligned with the easier path. This is why spiritual numbness feels peaceful at first. Conflict disappears, resistance fades, but peace without alignment is not peace, it is sedation. Eventually, the person wonders why their spiritual life feels hollow, why prayer feels distant, why truth feels muted, why conviction feels rare. The answer is not lack of belief, it is misdirected desire. You cannot sustain spiritual fire on emotional fuel, and you cannot walk in clarity when your deepest hunger has been trained toward distraction. Reclaiming desire requires awareness before effort. You cannot force yourself to want what you have trained yourself to ignore. You must first recognize how your attention, habits, and environment have shaped your inner appetite. Only then can you begin the slow process of retraining desire, not through guilt, but through intentional exposure, discipline, and patience. This hidden war is not won by dramatic vows or emotional moments. It is won by daily decisions about what you feed, what you avoid, what you tolerate, and what you protect. Desire follows attention, attention follows habit. Habit shapes destiny. Your spiritual future is being decided not by what you say you believe, but by what you consistently desire. And if you do not consciously shape that desire, something else will. If you want to continue uncovering how this hidden war operates and how to reclaim authority over your inner life, subscribe to the channel. These teachings are here to help you regain clarity, strength, and direction before your desires quietly decide your future for you. Why most people lose this war without ever falling. One of the most deceptive elements of this hidden war is that it does not require you to fail visibly in order to lose. Most people imagine spiritual loss as collapse, scandal, moral failure, public contradiction, or abandonment of faith. But in reality, the majority of spiritual defeats happen quietly, invisibly, and respectably. People lose this war while still functioning, still believing, still appearing stable. That is what makes it so dangerous. This war is not primarily about making you fall. It is about making you settle. It's about slowly lowering your internal standards until spiritual weakness feels normal and spiritual strength feels extreme. When that shift happens, you do not feel defeated. You feel adjusted. One of the main ways people lose without falling is through spiritual passivity. Passivity does not feel sinful. It feels reasonable. You tell yourself you will re-engage when life slows down, when you feel more motivated, when circumstances improve. But passivity is not neutral. In spiritual terms, passivity is surrender. Growth does not maintain itself. Discernment does not sharpen itself. Alignment does not preserve itself. Anything that is not intentionally strengthened will inevitably weaken. The hidden war thrives in this gap between intention and action. People intend to grow. They intend to change. They intend to deepen their inner life. But intention without structure produces no transformation. Over time, intention becomes a substitute for obedience. You feel spiritually responsible because you mean well, even though nothing is actually changing. Another reason people lose quietly is because the war convinces them that struggle itself is failure. They believe that if they still feel tension, resistance, or conflict, something must be wrong with them, so they seek relief instead of refinement. But struggle is not evidence of weakness. It is evidence of awareness. The absence of struggle often means the war has already been decided internally. When spiritual conflict disappears entirely, it is rarely because alignment has been achieved. More often, it is because desire has shifted away from resistance. The soul stops fighting when it stops caring. That numbness is not peace, it is disengagement. Another subtle way people lose is through identity dilution. Over time, they stop seeing themselves as participants in an ongoing inner battle and begin seeing themselves as static personalities. They say things like, "This is just how I am," or "I've always been like this," without questioning whether those patterns are shaping them towards strength or decay. Identity becomes an excuse instead of a responsibility. This shift is dangerous because it removes agency. If you believe your inner life is fixed, you stop guarding it, you stop training it, you stop correcting it. The war loves fixed identities because they eliminate vigilance. A guarded soul questions itself, an unguarded soul assumes itself. Another major factor is comfort normalization. As long as life is manageable, the urgency to grow disappears. Comfort numbs awareness. You are not desperate enough to seek depth and not broken enough to demand clarity. Everything feels fine, and fine becomes the enemy of transformation. The war does not need to make life painful. It only needs to make it comfortable enough that you stop pressing inward. This is why seasons of discomfort often produce more spiritual growth than seasons of ease. Pain strips illusions. Difficulty exposes dependence. Pressure reveals priorities. Comfort, by contrast, allows drift. When everything feels stable, the soul relaxes its grip on discipline. People also lose this war through compartmentalization. They divide their life into spiritual and non-spiritual zones. Faith becomes something they practice occasionally, instead of something that governs everything. They pray, but they do not guard their thoughts. They believe, but they do not examine their habits. They worship, but they do not discipline their attention. This fragmentation weakens integrity. Integrity is not moral perfection, it is alignment. When inner values and outer behavior drift apart, tension builds. Over time, instead of correcting the drift, many people lower their values to match their behavior. This relieves discomfort but destroys clarity. The war wins when alignment is replaced by justification. Another overlooked reason people lose is fatigue, misinterpretation. Spiritual tiredness is often treated as a sign to disengage rather than a signal to realign. When prayer feels dry, people stop praying. When reflection feels difficult, they stop reflecting. When discipline feels heavy, they abandon it. But dryness is often a sign of transition, not termination. Growth phases often feel uncomfortable before they feel rewarding. The war exploits fatigue by whispering that rest means withdrawal instead of restoration. True rest strengthens alignment. False rest numbs it. Escapism is not rest. Distraction is not renewal. Withdrawal from discipline does not heal fatigue. It deepens it. Another way people lose without falling is by mistaking information for transformation. They consume spiritual content endlessly but apply very little. Knowledge creates the illusion of growth. You feel engaged, informed, and stimulated, but your inner life remains unchanged. The war does not fear informed minds, it fears disciplined lives. Information without embodiment weakens authority. You know what is right, but you do not live it. Over time, this gap creates internal dissonance. To relieve the tension, many people reduce the standard instead of raising the practice. They reinterpret truth to match their habits. This quiet compromise feels intellectual, but it is deeply corrosive. Social reinforcement also plays a role. When the environment around you affirms minimal effort and shallow engagement, depth begins to feel excessive. Discipline feels extreme. Conviction feels rigid. You start self-censoring spiritual seriousness to remain socially acceptable. The war thrives when depth is mocked and seriousness is softened. Eventually, people reach a point where they are not spiritually dead, but they are no longer spiritually dangerous to darkness. They do not challenge themselves. They do not challenge others. They do not disrupt anything. They exist comfortably within the system, untouched and unthreatening. This is the quiet defeat, not collapse, but containment. You are still present but no longer advancing, still believing but no longer becoming, still functional but no longer formidable. Winning this war requires redefining what loss looks like. Loss is not falling publicly. Loss is drifting privately. Loss is settling for comfort over clarity, relief over alignment, explanation over correction. Loss is allowing years to pass without meaningful inner transformation. The moment you recognize this, the war changes. You stop measuring success by appearances and start measuring it by depth. You stop asking whether you are failing and start asking whether you are growing. You stop confusing stability with strength. Your spiritual future is not destroyed in moments of weakness. It is shaped in seasons of passivity, and reclaiming it begins with refusing to settle for quiet defeat. If this message is awakening awareness in you, subscribe to the channel. These teachings exist to help you recognize subtle losses before they become permanent limitations and to reclaim the strength you were meant to walk in. How this hidden war gradually steals your spiritual authority. One of the clearest signs that this hidden war is being lost is not moral collapse, emotional chaos, or visible rebellion, but the slow disappearance of spiritual authority. Authority is not volume, confidence, or personality. Spiritual authority is the quiet strength that comes from inner alignment. It is the ability to stand firm without forcing, to discern without confusion, to influence without manipulation, and to remain stable without constant reassurance. And this war is designed to strip that authority away so gradually that most people never realize what they have lost. Spiritual authority does not vanish overnight. It erodes through small, repeated inner concessions. Every time you ignore a conviction, rationalize a compromise, or silence an inner warning, a small portion of authority is surrendered. Not because you are punished, but because authority depends on integrity between what you know, what you believe, and what you live. When that integrity fractures, authority weakens. At first, the loss is barely noticeable. You still pray, you still speak truth, you still believe. But something subtle changes. Your words feel lighter, your convictions feel less anchored. Your inner confidence begins to rely more on external validation than internal clarity. You compensate with explanation, intensity, or activity, not realizing that what is missing is alignment, not effort. This war targets authority by targeting obedience. Not dramatic obedience, but quiet, consistent obedience in unseen areas. Authority is not built in public moments. It is built in private ones. When you repeatedly choose convenience over obedience, comfort over discipline, and delay over action, authority diminishes even if belief remains intact. Belief without obedience produces knowledge, not power. Another way authority is stolen is through inner division. When you live with unresolved contradictions, knowing what strengthens you but consistently choosing what weakens you, the inner self fractures. One part of you wants growth, another part resists cost. Over time, instead of resolving the conflict, many people normalize it. They learn to live divided. That division drains authority because authority requires wholeness. A divided person can still function, but they cannot stand firmly. They are easily influenced by mood, environment, and pressure. Their clarity fluctuates. Their discernment weakens under stress. Their convictions bend under convenience. This instability is not personality-based, it is alignment-based, and the war thrives in that instability. The war also steals authority by redefining humility. True humility is submission to truth, not submission to comfort. False humility avoids responsibility by hiding behind phrases like, "No one is perfect," or "We all struggle." While these statements are true, they are often used to justify stagnation. Authority requires humility, but humility that leads to correction, not resignation. When humility becomes an excuse to avoid discipline, authority dissolves. You stop expecting strength from yourself. You stop guarding your inner life seriously. You stop believing transformation is possible now, instead postponing it indefinitely. Authority cannot survive in an atmosphere where growth is always delayed. Another tactic is dependency replacement. Instead of drawing strength from inner alignment, people begin drawing it from external sources: approval, affirmation, relationships, routines, or constant input. These things are not evil, but when they become primary sources of stability, authority shifts outward. You become dependent rather than grounded. A person with spiritual authority can be alone without losing clarity. A person without it feels destabilized by silence. They need constant reassurance, stimulation, or connection to feel steady. The war wins when your stability becomes externally managed rather than internally cultivated. Authority is also weakened through emotional reactivity. When emotions govern decisions rather than inform them, authority erodes. Reactivity creates impulsiveness. Impulsiveness weakens discernment. Discernment weakened over time produces inconsistency, and inconsistency destroys authority. You become predictable to pressure instead of anchored in principle. This is why the war amplifies emotional noise. When your inner world is constantly stirred, triggered, and unsettled, you have little capacity to stand firm. You react instead of respond. You adjust instead of discern. Authority requires emotional regulation, not emotional suppression, but regulation that comes from inner order. Another major factor is fear management. Authority diminishes when fear is allowed to silently govern choices. Fear of loss, rejection, discomfort, isolation, or inconvenience leads to quiet compromises. You avoid saying no when you should. You avoid saying yes when you should. You delay action. You soften convictions. Over time, fear becomes a silent decision-maker. Authority does not mean absence of fear. It means fear does not rule. When fear consistently overrides discernment, authority drains away. The war does not need to make you afraid of everything. It only needs to make fear feel reasonable enough to obey. The war also attacks authority by blurring moral clarity, not through obvious lies, but through endless nuance. Everything becomes complicated. Every conviction requires explanation. Every standard requires exception. While discernment involves wisdom, excessive complexity often masks avoidance. When nothing is clear, nothing is obeyed. Authority requires clarity. Clarity requires commitment. Commitment requires cost. The war inserts complexity at the point of cost. To delay commitment indefinitely, you are always considering, always processing, always learning, but rarely acting. Action delayed becomes authority denied. Another subtle way authority fades is through self-betrayal. Each time you promise yourself something and fail to follow through without correction, trust erodes. Not trust in God, but trust in yourself. Inner authority depends on self-trust rooted in integrity. When you consistently break your own word, your inner voice loses credibility. Eventually, you stop listening to yourself. Convictions feel weaker because you have learned to ignore them. Prompts feel quieter because they have been dismissed too often. This is not punishment. It is conditioning. Authority requires responsiveness. Unresponsiveness trains silence. The tragedy is that many people sense this loss, but misdiagnose it. They think they need more motivation, more inspiration, more information, more intensity. But authority is not built by emotion. It is built by consistency. It returns not through dramatic moments, but through restored alignment. Reclaiming authority requires returning to small acts of obedience that rebuild integrity. Doing what you know to do, even when you do not feel like it. Guarding your inner life even when no one sees. Choosing depth when distraction is easier. These actions feel insignificant at first, but they restore inner coherence. Authority grows when your inner world becomes ordered again. When desire, discipline and direction begin to align, when your yes means yes internally, not just externally, when your convictions are lived, not just held. This war is not trying to destroy your faith. It is trying to neutralize your influence. A believer without authority is safe to the system. A believer with authority disrupts darkness simply by standing aligned. Your spiritual future depends not on how much you know, but on how much authority you retain. And authority is preserved through vigilance, discipline, and courage in small, unseen choices. If you feel this message exposing areas where authority has quietly weakened, subscribe to the channel. These teachings exist to help you reclaim inner strength, restore alignment, and step back into the authority that was never meant to be lost. How to reclaim your spiritual future before this war decides it for you. This hidden war does not exist to announce defeat. It exists to create delay, confusion, fatigue, and quiet resignation. But the most important truth you must understand is this: the war is not irreversible. No matter how long it has been shaping your habits, desires, attention, or inner posture, it can be confronted, interrupted, and overturned. Your spiritual future is not fixed by what you have lost, but by what you are willing to reclaim. Reclaiming your spiritual future does not begin with intensity, it begins with honesty. The war loses power the moment you stop pretending you are unaffected by it. Many people remain trapped not because they are weak, but because they refuse to admit drift. They minimize erosion because it feels less painful than confrontation. But clarity always precedes restoration. You cannot reclaim what you refuse to acknowledge. The first step in reclaiming your future is recovering awareness of your inner world. This war thrives on unconscious living. When days blur together without reflection, when habits run on autopilot, when attention is constantly pulled outward, the inner life becomes neglected. Reclaiming awareness means intentionally slowing down long enough to observe yourself honestly, not to judge, but to see. You must ask uncomfortable questions. What actually shapes my desires? What consistently captures my attention? Where have I lowered my standards without admitting it? What convictions have I postponed instead of obeyed? What inner warnings have I silenced through explanation? These questions are not meant to condemn you. They are meant to restore sight. The next step is reclaiming attention. Attention is the currency of the inner life. Whatever holds it consistently will shape you. The war understands this deeply, which is why distraction is one of its primary weapons. You cannot reclaim your spiritual future without reclaiming where your attention goes daily, not occasionally, daily. This does not require abandoning the world or withdrawing from life. It requires intentional boundaries. Attention must be guarded, not because everything outside is evil, but because your inner life is fragile when neglected. Constant stimulation weakens discernment. Constant noise dulls conviction. Silence is not empty. It is fertile. Reclaiming attention means intentionally choosing moments of stillness even when they feel uncomfortable. It means reducing unnecessary consumption. It means learning to sit with your thoughts instead of escaping them. This feels difficult at first because the war has trained you to avoid stillness, but stillness is where clarity returns. Another critical step is restoring discipline without punishment. Discipline is often misunderstood as harshness, restriction, or self-denial for its own sake. But true discipline is alignment in action. It is choosing what strengthens you even when something else feels easier. Discipline is not about forcing yourself into transformation. It is about creating conditions where transformation becomes possible. This requires small, consistent actions, not dramatic gestures. Reclaiming discipline means choosing regular times for reflection even when you do not feel inspired. It means practicing restraint even when indulgence feels justified. It means keeping promises to yourself even when no one else will know. Discipline rebuilds self-trust, and self-trust restores authority. The war weakens people by making discipline feel optional. Reclaiming your future requires treating discipline as essential, not because you are failing, but because you are rebuilding. You do not discipline what you despise. You discipline what you value. Another essential element is reclaiming responsibility for your inner state. This does not mean blaming yourself for everything you feel. It means refusing to live as a passive victim of moods, impulses, and circumstances. The war wins when you believe your inner life is something that simply happens to you. Reclaiming responsibility means recognizing that while you cannot control every thought or emotion, you can choose what you dwell on, what you reinforce, and what you resist. You can choose what environments you remain in. You can choose what voices you listen to. You can choose what patterns you continue and which ones you interrupt. Responsibility restores agency. Agency restores hope. Hope restores movement. Many people feel spiritually stuck because they have surrendered agency without realizing it. They wait to feel different before acting differently. Reclaiming your future requires acting aligned even when feelings lag behind. Another crucial step is confronting fear honestly. Fear is one of the most effective silencers of spiritual progress. Fear of discomfort, fear of loss, fear of isolation, fear of effort, fear of change. The war does not need fear to be overwhelming. It only needs it to feel reasonable. Reclaiming your future requires recognizing where fear has been quietly deciding your actions. Where have you avoided depth because it feels demanding? Where have you avoided commitment because it feels risky? Where have you softened convictions to avoid tension? Fear thrives in avoidance. Courage grows in exposure. Courage does not mean fear disappears. It means fear is no longer the authority. Each time you act aligned despite fear, fear loses influence. Authority returns gradually through repeated acts of courage, not sudden bravery. Another powerful step is reclaiming consistency. Consistency is more important than intensity. The war encourages extremes because extremes are unsustainable. People either push themselves briefly and burn out or disengage entirely. Reclaiming your future requires moderate, consistent commitment. Consistency rebuilds rhythm. Rhythm stabilizes the inner life. A stable inner life resists erosion. You do not need perfect days. You need faithful ones. Days where you show up even imperfectly. Days where you choose alignment even when motivation is low. Another overlooked aspect is reclaiming your standards. Not standards imposed by others, but standards rooted in what strengthens your spirit. Over time, many people lower their standards to reduce inner tension. Reclaiming your future requires raising them again thoughtfully and intentionally. Standards are not rules to restrict you. They are boundaries that protect what matters. Without standards, everything competes equally for your attention, and depth always loses. With standards, you choose intentionally rather than reactively. This also requires reclaiming solitude. Solitude is not loneliness. It is the environment where self-awareness deepens and alignment is restored. The war discourages solitude because solitude exposes misalignment. But exposure is necessary for healing. Solitude allows you to hear what has been drowned out by noise. It allows you to feel what has been numbed by distraction. It allows you to confront what has been postponed by busyness. Reclaiming solitude is reclaiming honesty with yourself. Another key element is reclaiming patience. Spiritual rebuilding is slow by design. The war convinces you that if progress is not immediate, it is pointless. This lie keeps people cycling through short bursts of effort, followed by resignation. Reclaiming your future means committing to the long process, trusting that small alignments accumulate, that clarity returns gradually, that authority is rebuilt quietly. You do not need to feel powerful to become strong. You need to stay aligned long enough for strength to return. It is also essential to reclaim humility correctly. Humility does not mean lowering expectations for growth. It means remaining teachable and responsive. True humility says, "I can change, and I'm willing to do what that requires." False humility says, "This is just how I am." The war prefers resignation disguised as acceptance. Reclaiming your future requires rejecting that lie. Growth is possible. Transformation is real. But it requires participation. Another powerful step is reclaiming discernment. Discernment is not suspicion, it is clarity. It allows you to recognize what strengthens you and what weakens you. Discernment sharpens through practice, not theory. You must begin evaluating choices not just by whether they are allowed, but by whether they are beneficial. Not just whether they are popular, but whether they are formative. Not just whether they feel good, but whether they build strength. Discernment returns authority because it restores intentional living. You stop drifting and start choosing. Finally, reclaiming your spiritual future requires commitment to vigilance. This war does not end permanently. It must be managed. Awareness must be maintained. Discipline must be protected. Attention must be guarded. But this is not exhausting when done rightly. It becomes life-giving. Alignment produces energy. Clarity produces peace. Authority produces stability. Your spiritual future is not something you stumble into accidentally. It is something you build deliberately. This war is not meant to terrify you. It is meant to awaken you. You are not powerless. You are not late. You are not beyond restoration. But the time to reclaim your future is now, not someday. If this series has helped you recognize the hidden war shaping your inner life and given you clarity on how to reclaim your spiritual future, subscribe to the channel. These teachings exist to help you stay awake, stay aligned, and walk with strength in a world designed to quietly pull you away from who you were meant to become.